There's a field in southwest Georgia that has not been planted this season. Not because the farmer who worked it retired, not because the land went bad, but because the numbers stopped making sense. The man who farmed that ground for years did the math: inputs, rent, expected commodity price, interest on the operating loan, and the math said stop. So he stopped, and the field sits there, empty, and nobody is knocking on the door trying to rent it. That field is not alone, and that story, playing out quietly across one of the most agriculturally rich states in America, is what nobody in the national media is connecting the dots on. Because what is happening to Georgia farms right now is not just a weather story, not just a policy story, not just an economic story. It is all three colliding at the same time, and the people responsible for running this state are scrambling to hold it together. Here's where we start. Georgia's #1 industry is agriculture, not film, not logistics, not tech, agriculture. 1 in every 7 jobs in this state ties back to the farm economy in some way. Pecans, cotton, peanuts, soybeans, corn, blueberries, poultry, timber. The diversity of what Georgia grows is actually a point of pride. The state can produce almost any crop that exists, but that diversity became a vulnerability the moment everything started collapsing at once. The U.S. Agriculture Secretary stood under the Gold Dome in Atlanta in March of this year and said plainly that the farm economy is still the worst we have seen in decades, perhaps in our lifetime. That was not a farmer venting. That was the top agricultural official in the federal government standing in the state capitol saying it out loud. That moment should have dominated the news cycle. Instead, it barely made a ripple outside of agricultural circles. But the numbers behind that statement are staggering. Start with the hurricane. Hurricane Helene wiped out about 1/3 of Georgia's pecan and cotton crops and damaged 1.5 million acres of timber. 1.5 million acres! If you drove the length of those damaged timberlands, you would be driving for days. A federal block grant of more than $500 million was announced to help producers rebuild, and state officials warned it will take years before South Georgia looks anything like it did before the storm hit. But here's the thing about disaster money: it always arrives late. Farmers do not wait for checks. They plant on borrowed time and borrowed capital. They take out operating loans in the spring and pray the fall gives them enough to pay them back. And when a hurricane wipes out 1/3 of your crop and the check takes over a year to arrive, the loan does not wait, the interest does not wait, the equipment note does not wait. Georgia's own agricultural commissioner said farm families have run out of equity. They have run out of ways to stretch that dollar thin. That's the Commissioner of Agriculture for the state, not an activist, not a protester, saying his own farmers have nothing left to stretch. And now layer in what came after the hurricane: tariffs. Fertilizer prices in 2026 are running 10 to 15% higher than they were just a year ago, in part because of tariff policy. Input costs across the board, fuel, equipment, chemicals, are all elevated, and the markets that Georgia farmers sell into have shrunk because trading partners responded to American tariffs with tariffs of their own. You hit a farmer with a disaster on one side and a trade war on the other, and you start to understand why the math stopped working. The bankruptcy numbers make this concrete. Georgia recorded 27 Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies last year, up 145% from the year before. That's the second highest number of any state in the country. Nationally, 315 farm bankruptcies were filed in 2025, a 46% increase in a single year. And the people who track these numbers for a living will tell you that bankruptcy filings are a lagging indicator. They represent the farms that couldn't hold on any longer. The farms that are still holding on, but barely, those do not show up yet. A state senator from southwest Georgia put it starkly. She sees parallels to the 1980s farm crisis. Among the most respected producers in southwest Georgia, a man who set the world record for soybean yield back-to-back dropped 3,000 acres in November 2025. He called up 12 landlords in a 3-week window and told them he was walking away from that ground. His reasoning was direct. Generational growers in his area are either cutting back, quitting, falling into bankruptcy, or grasping at straws. Farms.com quoted him as saying, "We are literally paying to farm, not getting paid to farm. Every year it costs more to farm input-wise, and unless something changes, I don't see things changing." Think about what that means from a food security standpoint. This is not a marginal farmer. This is the best soybean grower on earth saying the economics no longer work. There was ground in southwest Georgia in 2025 that didn't get planted. In 2026, he predicted there would be even more unplanted acres, and he was right. Fields that were productive for generations are sitting idle, not because of drought, not because of disease, but because a spreadsheet said it makes more sense to walk away than to plant. So what does the state response look like? 10 pieces of agricultural legislation were signed into law, measures including tax exemptions on disaster relief payments, streamlined conservation programs, and new protections for prescribed burning to prevent wildfires. These are not nothing. They represent real relief in real categories. But critics and farmers themselves will tell you that legislation cannot fix a structural economics problem. You can exempt a disaster payment from state income tax, but if the disaster payment itself arrives 16 months late, the farm may already be gone by the time that exemption matters. A recent survey found that 78% of responding southern farmers were unable to afford all the fertilizer they needed, the highest percentage of any region in the country. 78%! That means more than 3 out of 4 farmers in the South are already compromising on inputs, which means they're already locked into lower yields before the season even begins. Total farm debt nationally is projected to reach a record $624 billion in 2026. Farm bankruptcies have surged 46%, and analysts are warning of a generational downturn. A 4th consecutive year of income pressure, forcing greater reliance on debt just to keep the lights on. One agricultural economist invoked the 1980s farm crisis. That comparison should make every policymaker in this country go cold. The 1980s farm crisis reshaped rural America for a generation. It broke towns, ended family operations that ran for 100 years, and left scars that some communities never fully recovered from. Farmers have been hit from every direction: seesawing tariffs, damaging trade policies, inflation, and drastic cuts to federal farm programs. These impacts, combined with decades of policy that favors large-scale industrial operations over family farms, are bringing many growers and the rural communities they support to a breaking point. Georgia is the canary. It has everything stacked against it right now: hurricane damage, specialty crops that received less federal support than Midwest commodity crops, sandy soils that are less forgiving, and farmers who were already running on thinner margins than their counterparts in Iowa or Nebraska. What is happening here is happening faster and harder than most of the country is paying attention to. And those empty fields, the ones sitting unplanted across southwest Georgia right now, are not just an agricultural problem, they're a warning. Every acre that doesn't get planted this year is food that doesn't get grown. Every farm that goes under is a family that doesn't come back. every rural town that loses its agricultural base doesn't simply pivot to something else. The grocery store closes, the equipment dealer closes, the school shrinks, the hospital cuts hours. It's a cascade. The question now is whether the response, the legislation, the disaster payments, the political attention arrives fast enough and big enough to stop that cascade before it becomes irreversible. The farmers watching those empty fields are not sure it will, and honestly, the numbers aren't either.